You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. News, views and interviews in association with FE News. Evening all. It's Thursday again, and that can only mean one thing. Hashtag clap for carers at the end of this show. But don't go away just yet. There's 60 glorious minutes of Skills World Live still to come. Stay with me, Tom Bewick, your FE community radio DJ, who is quite obviously a glutton for punishment. As if back-to-back Skypes, Zooms and Microsoft Team meetings were not enough to send a person googly-eyed and into an early evening stupor, here I find myself once again broadcasting from my man cave here in the deep reaches of Sussex. On the show tonight, and because it's Thursday, when we say thanks to all those wonderful key workers, we'll be focusing on our National Health Service. That's right, folks. We'll be asking the question, are we doing enough to train people for the country's largest employer? With the virus not going away anytime soon, how do we make our healthcare system more resilient? My guests this evening all have a perspective on this national challenge. The head of skills of a combined mayoral authority will be joining me to talk about the 8,000 nursing shortages in her region and how to tackle them, as well as what the authority will be doing with the adult education budget that's now been devolved from central government. And that includes helping healthcare settings get access to an estimated £40 million of the apprenticeship levy pot. And stay tuned for the final segment of the show, when we'll be doing an FE community radio first by handing over the airwaves to a new sector-wide campaign, hashtag Stand Up for Skills, all spearheaded by our very own City and Guilds Group CEO, Kirstie Donnelly. That's right, Kirstie will be wresting the microphone from me and presenting a weekly segment, this week kicking off an interview with Jane Hadfield of NHS England. But first, let's find out what's been making the news headlines in the further education sector this evening. The Department for Education appears to have U-turned on a decision it published only yesterday to cancel the apprenticeship data service releases until November. The decision sparked a row from sector representatives who argued the government should continue to publish data showing the full impact of COVID-19 on apprenticeship starts and completions. A revised statement was published on the .gov website earlier today, which now indicates that government will continue to publish regular apprenticeship service data. The official site also stated that releases would be repurposed to provide more relevant information. In other news, plans to scrap the apprenticeship levy-funded MBAs have been set back, according to a senior official at the Institute for Apprenticeships. Sally Timmons cited internal processes and notice periods as reason why the removal of the £18,000 levy-funded MBAs could not happen until at least November. The MBA apprenticeship sparked controversy late last year when it was discovered that thousands of adults had commenced on the Level 7 qualifications, including 34 senior civil servants at the Department for Education. Earlier this year, the Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, ordered a review. Since then, the Institute has said that the MBA apprenticeships can continue in future, but without the need for a mandated qualification, although they will no longer attract levy support. And finally, the cereals giant Kellogg's and Company has announced grants of £1,000 being made available to support schools open for the families of key workers. The breakfast grant can be spent on anything the schools need to make breakfast at school a possibility. Schools can apply by clicking on this programme's website. That's all your Skills World news from fenews.co.uk. Contact us at Skills World Live. Email skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. Follow us on Twitter @Tom Bewick, @FE News, use the hashtag SkillsWorld. Call us on 02032 900 111. That's 02032 900 111. For tonight's big debate, we'll be looking at the whole issue of whether we are training enough people for our National Health Service. Because if there's one thing that has been brought into sharp focus as a result of this public health emergency we are all now living through, it is just how much we rely on both the clinical and non-clinical staff of our NHS and social care systems. The NHS, we all know and love, of course, was introduced in 1948 on a basic universal principle. Whether you're young or old, rich or poor, the NHS is available to you and us free at the point of use. Although we do pay for it through our general taxes. Where in Britain, we insure against ill health, old age and social risk by all chipping in together. As life expectancy, healthcare needs and technology has changed, so also has our appetite for spending on what the former Conservative Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, called the closest thing the English have to a national religion. In 1949, when you benchmark spending to the value of today's pound, the Attlee government spent just £13 billion per year on the NHS. Today, the comparable figure we spend is a whopping £150 billion. The NHS is also the country's largest employer, with 1.7 million staff, making it the fifth biggest employer in the world. That's right, folks. Our national religion is slightly smaller than the US retail giant Walmart and India's sprawling state railway. But our healthcare giant weighs in just a couple of 100,000 employers larger than the North Korean People's Army. And from the sketchy reports coming out of Pyongyang in recent days, it sounds like the third in line of the Kim dynasty, Jong-un, could have done with a little help from those NHS doctors treating Boris Johnson. But I digress. The NHS not only has a huge workforce, it also has massive future skills needs. The respected think tank, the King's Fund, had already estimated pre-COVID-19 crisis NHS shortages of 100,000, saying that these staff shortages were expected to increase to 250,000 by the end of the decade. A truly eye-watering figure. This comes at a time when health education spending has been cut by £2 billion during the austerity years, and in 2017, under Theresa May's government, the popular nursing bursaries were axed. Realising their short-sightedness, the Conservatives at the last election promised to restore the £8,000 a year grants. The workforce challenge, however, remains. The Health Foundation estimates that the NHS will need to recruit an additional 500 nurses from overseas per annum until 2024 just to stay afloat. This comes at a time when NHS hospitals reported 13% of its staff are non-British passport holders, rising to a figure of 28% among doctors. NHS representatives say the sector workforce will collapse if the government does not continue with a liberal immigration regime, allowing workers to fill jobs in both the NHS and social care systems. But critics argue, however, that the NHS, as a public sector employer, should be doing far more to recruit and train homegrown talent. Indeed, they object to a system of NHS managers recruiting from some of the poorest parts of the world and poaching qualified doctors and nurses to come and work in our NHS, leaving their own country's systems bereft of the skills they need. The answer, ministers say, post-Brexit, is for employers to invest more. But how can the NHS be encouraged to do that? After this short musical break, I'll be putting some of these challenges to Clare Hatton, the Head of Skills Delivery at the West Midlands Combined Authority. You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick.
Now every day, every night, every moment with you.
listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. Welcome back, everybody. That was I'm Crazy for Love by Craig Reaver. And I sound like a broken record now, but I always tell you where we get our tracks from. We are supporting independent record labels during the COVID-19 crisis, and all of our tracks can be found on epidemicsound.com. So head over to there when you can. Delighted now to continue with the big debate, and on the line I'm joined by Clare Hatton, who is the Head of Skills Delivery at the West Midlands Combined Authority. Good evening, Clare.
Good evening, Tom.
Thank you so much for giving up your evening to be on Skills World Live and talk all about your wonderful region of the West Midlands. Now, look, Clare, you're welcome. In December, your region reported, according to the Royal College of Nursing, 8,000 nursing vacancies. That's nearly 13% of the workforce. How can the work of your combined authority help the NHS trusts tackle that recruitment challenge?
I think there's a number of things we can do. There's some things we can do directly as a combined authority, working with our colleges and training providers, getting more young people and adults into entry routes and up to level 3 qualifications ready to move into nursing training, so we can help provide the pipeline. Equally, as a combined authority and through the advocacy of the Mayor, we can keep making the argument for more funding, for better provision and more investment in the region for us to be able to work with our universities, our colleges and our training providers to make sure we're training the quantity of people needed to fulfil those really, really critical roles.
That's right. I mean, you're part of quite an innovation, really, in English devolution. You're one of 8 combined authorities with a directly elected mayor. The mayor works, I think, with 7 local council leaders who have full voting rights on a board with the mayor, and indeed with other authorities in the region. Do you feel that experiment is working? I mean, have you got the levers and the powers and the funding and the resources that you need from Whitehall to do a job like solving the 8,000 nursing vacancies challenge in the NHS?
We don't have everything we need, but we have some of the levers, we have some of the funding, but what we do have is an absolute commitment to working in partnership in the region, and even where we don't have direct levers or funding, working together through strong partnerships. I think one of the real benefits of devolution and a democratically elected mayor is that for somewhere like the West Midlands, we are big enough to be able to mobilise, but we're still small enough to really understand what goes on the ground and work in partnership with both our employers and our training providers, so we can make things happen in a way that I think they can't happen from Whitehall. Absolutely.
I was reading your skills plan earlier, and one of the things that stuck out for me was that you've got, as a region, relatively high levels of employment, actually some very high-paid, high-skilled jobs, of course, in the West Midlands. I guess that's why it's sometimes referred to as the Midlands engine. But still, you've probably got a higher proportion of your local people that don't have any qualifications compared to neighbouring regions. And you've got a particular challenge, from what I could see, at the kind of technical level skills, level 4, level 5. What's the combined authority got planned to try and tackle some of those challenges over the coming years?
Yeah, well, the mantra of the combined authority is about inclusive growth. And whilst we drive the growth of the economy, it is pointless if it doesn't benefit our residents. And if those people who haven't got qualifications and haven't got jobs don't get the training and skills they need to be able to take up the opportunities. What we do is we work in a very tailored and precise way. So our construction gateway that we've been running over the last 2 years, which is a £5 million National Retraining Fund investment in the region, works closely with employers and colleges and training providers to take local unemployed people, train them and give them the skills to match them into the jobs. And with some of the big construction investments we've seen in the West Midlands around HS2, around the hospital in Sandwell and around the Commonwealth Games, as well as the Highways England investment, there are plenty of jobs that we can move people into. So we really see our role as being the joiner and the facilitator and making that happen.
Right. You also have this AEB budget, adult education budget, which has been devolved. And I'm sure if you've been following the sector news headlines over the past couple of weeks, there's quite a bit of controversy, particularly amongst independent training providers, about whether they are getting a fair deal and the kind of support, for example, that your FE colleges will be getting in the region from the Education Skills Funding Agency. I understand that mayoral authorities have taken a different view from the centre about supporting apprenticeships and supporting independent training providers. Is that the case in your region?
Yeah, we were the first region to announce what we would be doing to support our independent training providers, who are absolutely vital to the delivery of our AEB alongside our colleges and local authority providers. We have taken the approach that we will pay a minimum of a profile payment for the next 3 months based on the average earnings of providers over the previous few months to make sure they've got a guaranteed minimum. But really pleasingly, just having processed the first month of that, most of our providers earned in excess of that because they are really responding to deliver in this crisis.
So in a system historically, and obviously you can debate whether or not this is the right sort of funding model, but as you'll be well aware, we have a system in England, and I'm assuming now in the devolved areas too, where money follows the learner. In other words, there's payment for the activity, and often actually it's claimed back from authorities in arrears. What would happen if there was a situation where effectively training providers had taken that important cash flow support from you ahead of activity, and then they went bust? Where would that leave the combined authority in terms of liabilities?
I mean, that's one of the things we carefully considered before making the decision to do what we're doing. So following very much the Cabinet Office, the PNN notice that came out, and looking at our own, risk framework in terms of what we would do. And yes, that would be a risk for us, but something given the critical nature of needing the training provision and the providers is something we felt was on balance a risk that we should be investing in at this point.
Now, you've got an estimated, I think, £40 million from the apprenticeship levy pot in your region. I appreciate you don't have, obviously, control over the levy like, for example, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland does. It's devolved directly to them, and they obviously spend it different to the way it's spent in England with these digital accounts. But what is the plans of the combined authority to try and encourage more apprenticeships? Obviously, there's the apprentices that the National Health Service will need, there's the nurses, etc. But more broadly, how do you make sure, in particular, small and medium-sized enterprises get access to those funds?
I mean, that's exactly why we, as part of our skills deal, agreed the unique levy transfer responsibilities we have in the West Midlands.
All right, they're unique to the West Midlands, are they, Claire?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just explain a bit more then. What does that mean in practice? You say transfer authority.
So in the West Midlands, we work with large employers who donate their unspent levy to us. Money never actually comes to us. It's still managed through the technical accounts, but it's donated to us. And then we work with training providers and SMEs to redirect that money so that SMEs can have their apprenticeship training fully funded. To date, we've had £6.2 million donated to us from large employers.
Great. Well, look, I've still got time to ask you about the impact of COVID-19. Obviously, we're all in the midst here of lockdown and a crisis. Every part of the country, every business, every organisation, certainly every NHS trust, although they're clearly at the front line and very active at the moment. How do you see the skills plan, which of course you've already produced, changing as a result of the impact of COVID-19?
We've already made some changes. We've already worked with our providers to offer some flexibilities, some different training, some key worker training packages to get people skilled to work and respond to the demand in NHS, in warehousing particularly. We've seen quite a demand in those areas. I think overall the skills plan doesn't change too much. I think we're still going to need more people with technical level skills. We still have the ambition to move people who are not working into employment and help them gain qualifications where they don't have them. I think there's a real challenge for us that our providers are responding to about how we can deliver at this time. Much of the delivery has moved to be online, and I think we will see that continue forward as well.
I'm sure we will. Virtual learning is all the rage at the moment when you can't
absolutely
go very far. Just finally, Andy Street's sort of priorities. I think as a mayor, he's been very vocal in terms of getting delegated powers to the West Midlands. In relation to the skills brief, what would you like to see perhaps come from Whitehall, devolve from Whitehall in the future?
I think there's a couple of things we think are absolutely critical to supporting the region, both in recovery and moving forward into resilience in the future. I think one of those is a real influence over however the National Skills Fund is developed and delivered, and the National Retraining Fund. We think both of those can't be delivered or designed out of the context of a regional economy and a regional labour market. And also absolutely critical, we feel we need more control and influence over the provision of careers, all age career service to all of our residents, to make sure they can get the impartial advice and guidance they need.
Yeah, just brief comment. On the careers advice and guidance, brief comment on that. Do you think young people in the West Midlands do get that impartial advice and guidance at the moment?
Probably not every single one universally, no. And I think both our needs and our social, needs and social mobility figures would probably bear that out.
Right. Clare Hatton, Head of Skills Delivery at West Midlands Combined Authority. Pleasure talking to you this evening. Thank you so much for giving up your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. Let's have a bit of Hellman now. Honesty. That was Hellman there, and it looks like it's 2 nights in a row that I had both guests on the line, but all of a sudden, one just disappeared. But we do have Jamie Mackay, Skills Strategy Manager at Enterprise M3. You there, Jamie?
Hello. Hi there.
Hello. Now, what we did last night, which was rather funky, which at least proved that it is a live radio show being broadcast out of my man cave, I said earlier, in Sussex. We are going to give our other guest, Lawrence, a call. Hopefully, he'll pick up. Let's try him.
Hello.
Lawrence, we got you on Skills World Live.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, sorry, it was a dropout there. You see, this is what happens when you use mobile phone to mobile phone. It's the not
Indeed.
spots, isn't it? It's the not spots. Now, look, we've also got Jamie on the line, at least I hope we have, and I'm going to merge calls now. So we'll go quiet and then I'm going to bring you both in. Just
Okay.
hold a second. Okay, Jamie, you're still there?
I am still here, yeah.
Yeah, do you know what? We've got Lawrence with us as well.
Excellent.
Brilliant. That means we've got a three-way conversation. Jamie, let's start with you first. What's your perspective on tonight's big debate? I mean, how do we train more homegrown workers for the NHS?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm really interested in sort of tackling this by looking at sort of three perspectives. So, thinking about the NHS as you know the sort of the health sector, but also bringing in the social care sector, which arguably has had been ignored a little bit up until sort of most recently.
Yeah.
So thinking about those two sort of working in partnership. Thinking about career pathways into and through the NHS and social care, and also looking at ways that education and training and the health and care sectors are actually sort of working together in partnership. And over the last month or two, in our LEP area, we've seen some fantastic examples of education and training really sort of reaching up and supporting.
Just focus on one or two of those examples for us, Jamie, because I mean, you're right. There are some fascinating things going on out there. Just give us a flavour of what you're coming across.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, for example, there are. We've heard of some people returning to the NHS, who've previously retired. We've heard of students that sort of been given more sort of areas of responsibility to work in clinical settings. But in order to do that, there needs to be some training that goes along with it, just to make sure that they are safe and they're up to date with all of the necessary legislation, etc. So in our area, there's a COVID-19 training package that's actually been developed to support the needs of both registered and unregistered clinical workforce, and that's something that the NHS have been developing with the University of Surrey. Obviously there's been a lot of research going on. There's been an incredible amount of talk about PPE, colleges and universities have been looking to see what PPE have we got. Locally, we've got Basingstoke College of Technology and Farnborough College of Technology that have been looking at their different courses, and we're not just talking health and sort of science courses, but actually construction courses.
Yeah.
There's a great deal of PPE that's used there, so actually they're able to sort of donate that.
Right. Well, look, it's a three-way conversation, so I do want to bring Lawrence in because we've still got a few more minutes. We can unpack some of the issues, but Lawrence, you're managing director at GB Training Limited. What's your perspective on tonight's sort of big debate about the NHS and skills gaps? I mean, as Jamie was just saying there, I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary. I think it's something like 20,000 formerly retired NHS personnel, so that's doctors, but also non-clinical staff, have rejoined in the fight against the coronavirus. I mean, it makes you wonder whether perhaps, some of these individuals could have maybe retired perhaps a bit earlier than they should have. But what's your perspective on all that?
Well, we've been involved in training some of those at the Nightingale Hospital in Birmingham. But can I just start by thanking all those that work in the health and care sector, not just the NHS, but all those that work in health and social care settings.
Indeed.
GB Training's been working with health and social care providers for almost 20 years, and they do wonderful work. And as your colleague Jamie just mentioned, in recent years, it's a sector that has unfortunately been overlooked. If you take the current recruitment needs prior to COVID that the NHS are looking at, it's incredible. The shortfall, both for people to work in hospitals across a range of positions, and also in care homes. You're talking in excess of 100,000 for each of those. We as I said just a moment ago, we've done a lot of work training health and social care workers ranging from level 2 up to registered managers and nurses and beyond over the past 20 years. And unfortunately, I've seen a massive decline in the investment that government wish to place on training people coming into the industry. It has been locked in terms of the funding that's allocated to it, and it just simply hasn't been a priority.
Sure. I mean, I did reference, earlier the fact that, certainly a few years ago, there was about a £2 billion shortfall of spending in relation to education and the NHS. Obviously, the government scrapped the nursing bursaries, and then it just decided to bring the nursing bursaries back again. But I would have thought if there's one part of the economy and public sector that's going to get the funding it needs in future around training and PPE, it will be the National Health Service, given the crisis that we've found ourselves in. But given all the social distancing measures, Lawrence, I mean, how is training, as it were, taking place? Because obviously there's very strict rules about how many people can gather to do training. Is it all online or?
I'm glad you've asked me the question, because it allows us to say what a great job that we, under the providers and colleges, have done to adjust very rapidly to put our apprentices on digital platforms. So whilst they may be furloughed and in a position where they're not able to work, they continue learning, and they have been. I sent out communication to my workforce today to say that in excess of 75% of my learners, at any one time I've got a few thousand learners on program, 75% of those are actually well engaged in learning, which is excellent.
Yeah.
It is positive.
Sure, good.
I think sorry, just to make this point.
Yeah, the line's not brilliant, Lawrence. So do find the best possible spot in your home for that reception.
Sorry.
Just while you do that, I'm just going to go over to while you do that, I'm just going to go over to Jamie and continue the discussion with you, Jamie. I mean, tell me more about what Enterprise M3's doing then. I mean, you're the skills strategy manager, so you must be pretty front and centre of all of this.
Yeah, so something that we are developing with one of our colleges, so Guildford College, part of the Activate Learning Group, is actually putting together a care suite. So this will be, a sort of a training area on the college site for future employees, future workers in health and care settings to actually come and sort of learn the trade. We've got some fantastic vocational provision across our areas, as well as sort of the academic routes as well. We've got a nursing academy with Ashford and St Peter's and Brooklands College, which again gives that practical experience to students. So that it's a safe environment for them to actually sort of practice their skills, see them being done, and make it more real.
Yeah. And as you are so involved in nursing, as you're probably aware, there's been that big debate, hasn't there, about does nursing require a university degree? I mean, in the past it didn't. It was very much like, in that sense, an apprenticeship. People came. It was still professionally recognised, and one has to be on a register and all of that. Where's your thoughts on that? I mean, is it really necessary? Should it be a requirement that nurses have a degree?
It's an interesting question.
I asked the question in a way because obviously with only 50% of young people potentially going off and getting a degree still in our country, I mean, effectively it's, it means the NHS is recruiting from a more restricted pool because it makes that a requirement. So by definition, it can only really go for that 50% that are graduates, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing, in the labour market, more wholly now is a lot more people sort of moving around the labour market, and nursing is a really interesting one where the sorts of people from the population that are training to be nurses are tending to be female, are tending to be that little bit older. It might be a second career or sort of first career after sort of having children, but actually you're beginning to see more sort of males coming into the profession at different times in their lives as well.
You're
seeing more men becoming the primary caregiver at home as well. So I think nursing, all professions, is having to sort of move and update a little bit.
Absolutely, and nursing, of course, is a very different sort of profession as it was even 30 years ago. I mean, the levels of responsibility now that nurses have on wards, the clinical responsibilities as well that they have is huge. Lawrence, have we still got you on the line?
Can you hear me?
Oh, that is amazing. Do you know what? It feels like you're in the next room to me now. I feel like I could just come out
good.
there
That's better.
That's
I
brilliant.
Didn't
I know.
It was coming across
yeah,
badly.
this
Sorry
is just
about
one
that.
of the vagaries of mobile to mobile. But hey, it's one brilliant way of connecting the world of FE, and that's what Skills World Live is all about. And that's why it's fantastic to have you both on. Lawrence, you mentioned that you're doing work with the Nightingale hospitals, which I have to say have just been an extraordinary achievement from beginning to end. I mean, the fact that they've been built, first of all, in some cases 10 days. I'm not sure how long the one in the NEC, in Birmingham took to build, but I think we're talking days, not weeks, aren't we? So what's been your interaction then with the Nightingale hospitals?
So the referral came from West Midlands Combined Authority.
Great, who I spoke to just before. Yeah, I spoke to Clare.
Good. Excellent.
Just before
you.
Clare's
great.
Yeah.
And they wanted us to provide some, as a reaction to what was going on and in preparation for some training in manual handling and infection control for quite a few people that you referenced just a few moments ago that may have retired from the sector, or from NHS staff that don't necessarily work frontline ordinarily, but have been assigned to work at the hospital. And we've trained probably in excess of 300 people so far. I mean, fortunately, they haven't had to use the hospital yet, and let's hope it stays that way. But it's amazing how people came together, and I give credit to my own team that put themselves in that situation to carry out face-to-face training, and all the other providers that were involved. But just touch upon that, you just referenced nurses,
yes,
and talking about whether they need degrees or not. I mean, this is where vocational learning can be very, overlooked. There are degree level apprenticeships in ambulance practitioners and midwifery. I would suggest that I suppose a solution to the problem of getting an increase in nurses into the field is to actually use vocational learning as a method and as a pathway.
Sure.
We've seen such a massive decline in the funding that's available to the sector, but can I just say, because I know that you've spoken to Clare and the West Midlands Combined Authority, the devolvement of funding from central government to our region, from my perspective, has been brilliant, because we've had a really good dialogue with the authority. They're highly consultative. They have a clear vision for the residents of the region. And of course, all of this I'm talking in the context of pre-COVID. During this crisis, there's been extra communication that otherwise wouldn't have happened if the arrangements were still
absolutely. And of course, I
Westminster.
referenced that with Clare in terms of the continuity of payments to suppliers, because mayors have taken a different view to the Education Skills Funding Agency, for example.
Absolutely.
Look, we've just got a few moments, and you referenced it there in terms of post COVID-19 and how we get through this crisis and, frankly, to the other side. As a leader in the sector and running a training provider, Lawrence, what's on your mind, and how you briefly in terms of taking your organisation forward over the next few months?
I'm thrilled that the education sector, including my own provider, have made a very quick. We've adapted ourselves very quickly to ensure that people can continue learning. Education is vital, and investment into the health and social care sector across the board, not just the NHS, the other settings in care homes, and is vital for the future. And I really hope that, out of this crisis and deeply unfortunate international crisis, that a refocus and some energy and funding and priority is placed very much at the heart of health and social care. We've been doing it for decades, GB training. I've seen the decline. So this resurgence and this need and this requirement, and let it be a wake-up call to say, look, this is vital for our society. Yeah. So it therefore requires significant investment and desperately needs attention. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people that they need, that they're looking for all different types of job for within the NHS and across the health and social care sector.
Absolutely.
Post-COVID, it may increase.
Yeah, indeed. Well, even pre-COVID, as I referenced at the start of the show, one of the think tanks was estimating a workforce shortfall of 250,000 by the end of the decade. So there's going to be plenty to work there. Jamie, last word word to you on Skills World this evening. What's your thoughts about the future, briefly?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, building on what Lawrence has said, I mean, the NHS has got something like 350 different careers, and we don't always know a lot about them. So websites like Step Into the NHS.nhs.uk and healthcareers.nhs.uk, with a lot of home learning, including in the Mackay household right now. Let's be talking to our kids and exploring some of those career pathways while there's a light sort of shone on the NHS at the moment, and learn more about it. And I anticipate that actually there'll be some mums and dads out there that are thinking, you know what, I need a career change, and be talking to their kids about that as well. So I think this is a great opportunity.
Wonderful. What a great positive note to end this segment on. And I'm sure, like me, you'll be out on the doorstep in just a few moments' time, 20 minutes' time, to clap for the carers. Jamie Mackay, Skills Strategy Manager, Enterprise M3. Lawrence Barton, Managing Director at GB Training UK Limited. Thanks for joining this evening, chaps.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye.
Cheers. Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Well, we got there in the end, didn't we? Oh, the vagaries of doing a live radio community show. But really some great contributions on the show. Enjoyed every single one of the conversations I've had. This track now called Let Me Drown by Deans.
Always in my head. Met you at a time when I was so low. Went from just talking to taking you home. I don't wanna go back to who I used to be. So if you ever leave me, promise you won't let me down. Promise you won't let me but sometimes you can't handle your emotions, and I guess that's okay. Met you at a time when I was so low. Went from just talking to taking you home. I don't wanna go back to who I used to be. So if you ever leave me, promise you won't let me drown. Promise you won't let me drown. Promise you won't let me drown. Yeah. Oh, let me drown. Oh, no. Met you at a time when I was so low. Went from just talking to taking you home. I don't wanna go back to who I used to be. So if you ever leave me, promise you won't let me drown. Won't let me drown. No. Promise you won't let me drown. Won't let me drown. Promise you won't let me drown.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. Okay, welcome back to the final segment of the show, everyone. It's been a great show, hasn't it? We've talked about quite a few issues tonight in relation to the National Health Service and actually skills more generally. And I tell you what, I've learned something about mayoral combined authorities and some of the powers that they have in relation to the skills budget. Now, look, this is the first on Skills World Live. We're about to, I'm about to have the microphone wrestled from me from my good colleague, Kirstie Donnelly from City and Guilds, who's on the line. Hi, Kirstie.
Yeah, hi Tom, how you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. How's the weather in your neck of North? Is it North London?
Yeah, mixed actually. Mixed. It's definitely the late April showers have arrived, I think.
Right. Well, I've just got a lovely blue sky now here in Sussex. So who knows? The kids. Yeah, the kids might get me out in the garden before it's time for bedtime. After the show is closed, of course. Now, Kirstie, on Twitter, I'm sure you've been tagged on this from time to time. There's a big thing about first 5 jobs, and actually first 5 sort of jobs, not in your professional career, as it were, but before that all took off and got started. So I'm going to start.
You fun jobs.
Yeah. Well, the jobs with perhaps not so much responsibility, great laugh sometimes with your friends and colleagues, but actually also very important, as we're discovering now. And I think it's the theme of your segment with Jane Hadfield coming up shortly. Anyway, my 5 jobs were a paper round, selling double glazing door to door. Although I was sent off to a council estate where nobody owned the houses, so I didn't sell too many double glazing. Shelf stacker at Quick Save. Then I got a promotion, pushing trolleys at Asda, or Asda's, as it used to be called in my part of the world. And finally, my 5th job was a store lad at Butlins. Butlins.
Exotic.
Yeah, exotic. And by the way, store lad, not red coat. Clearly wasn't good enough for that. What about you? Go on, Kirstie, give me your 5 jobs.
Let's see if I can beat that. Lettuce picker, age 11. So I started with a young...
Age 11? That's child exploitation.
11. I know. Tell me about it. Glass cleaner, and then upgraded to waitress when it was legal. Sorting out tulip bulbs on a conveyor belt in Holland, 9 hours a day, tedious, and delivering posts on a campsite in France. I think that was my lot, Tom. Had a lot of fun, though.
Did you learn French? Je ne comprends pas. Petit peu. Right, brilliant. Well, look, tonight is the first time we've actually kicking off, which you're going to lead on, this hashtag Stand Up for Skills campaign. Yep. And it's over to you. I'm going to turn my mic off now, and it's over to you to introduce the next segment. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Well, look, evening, everybody, and in a moment I'll welcome my guest, Jane. Just want to say a couple of things about the hashtag Stand Up for Skills campaign. Came about in response to the fact that, yet again, I think during this COVID period, we probably saw a risk that FE and skills more generally could be cast into the shadows of schools and HE, as important as schools and HE are, of course. And so we wanted the campaign to really make sure that, the government respect the huge contribution that FE and the skills sector makes to society and UK PLC as a whole, and as indeed we're witnessing now firsthand during this crisis. In fact, what would we have done without all the people who've received a skills and FE-based qualification during this period? The warehouse store managers, the people working logistics in agriculture, and of course the people who we've been talking about tonight, who work in the NHS and more broadly across the healthcare sector. And we're going to be out on our doorsteps shortly, thanking them again, making as much noise as possible, the doctors, the nurses, the care workers, the porters, the morticians, the healthcare workers, receptionists, cleaners. I could go on and on and on. And so it takes me really nicely introducing my first guest this evening, and my only guest this evening, actually. So welcome, Jane Hadfield, Programme Leader for Health Education England, and also Jane, a registered nurse and also a chair of the Apprenticeship Trailblazer for Health and the chair of the T-Level panel. So you really do, Jane, understand how important training is across the health and social care sector. So thank you for taking the time to join us tonight, because I know you're a shining light in championing skills and apprenticeships across the NHS. So thank you for all you do. I'm sure you're pretty busy at the moment as well, but we know, Jane, that right now the NHS has had to stop some of its apprenticeships, hasn't it? And yet, more so than ever, we've been hearing tonight from Tom's guests how important training of nurses and care workers more generally right now and in the future is going to be. How concerned are you to make sure that this investment in skills and apprenticeships continues?
Yeah, hi, Kirstie, and thanks to Tom as well. So, at the beginning of this, and bearing in mind we're all dealing with this massive unknown, we don't know what the new normal is going to be and what's going to happen at the end of it. I was probably more concerned at the beginning than I am now when I saw, the reaction to pulling learners off programme, learners of all sorts, but what we have seen is a really positive, largely positive reaction from employers about doing their utmost to keep our apprentices on their programmes. because of the recognition of our longer term plans about these apprentices moving into the next stage of their own development journey. They're our talent pool, and as you rightly say, they're drawn from our schools and skills sector, they're drawn from our own employee workforce. So our current assistant and associate roles are definitely our talent pool for our future nurses and physios and occupational therapists and you name it, radiographer, speech and language therapist. So what I've seen is a knee-jerk reaction, but then a much more strategic thinking about what's right for the learner and what's right for the situation they're in. So I'm a bit more reassured, but we need to keep a really strong handle on that to be sure we don't backtrack. Because we've got to keep moving forward.
Keep the momentum. No, exactly. No, that makes absolute sense. And that's really reassuring, actually, because I think, as we continue to hear mixed messages about, what's happening in the apprenticeship starts generally, let alone in your profession, then I think keeping that momentum is absolutely right. And leads me on to my next point, really, which is you talked there about the importance of progression. And I suppose, it's probably a bit of an understatement to say we probably don't have enough skilled people across the sector to deal not just with the coronavirus now, but its aftermath and ongoing. So I suppose what opportunities do you see on the horizon from the new appreciation and insights that we've got actually of our healthcare system that you think can be done to really promote this workforce? I mean, we're going to be clapping shortly, which is fantastic, and I'm sure your colleagues all over appreciate that. But surely the big question here is we need to ensure these marvellous people and roles across the whole care sector are appreciated and appropriately trained, they're recognised and they're rewarded. That's surely got to be the direction of travel, right?
Yeah, I'd be very supportive of that view. That's my view, Kirstie. I think there's what's a real opportunity for us now that it has shone a light on who the real key workers are. And what does keep the country going and who is looking after us. And although I talk about progression, it's everybody's contribution at every level that's important. No nurse or doctor can work without someone to support them, from the receptionist to the porter to the patient transport driver to the volunteer. And it's at every level in the whole workforce. We're suffering, like every industry, with an ageing workforce. We reflect the general population. But what I would say is what's great about the current apprenticeship work that we've been doing is that some of the barriers to people getting on apprenticeships were taken away with the lifting of the age barriers, for instance. So we want to continue that sort of thing, that we truly reflect the people we're looking after, that we reflect the society in general, and that we make these careers at every level really attractive to people, because they can come in at any level, starting from level 2 all the way through. And we've got whole job families now that people can come in at any age. So career changers, returners, and new people into the health and care workforce. And they can move across in a more matrix fashion. It's not just one direction.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear. And I know Tom's going to take the mic back off you very shortly. So one last sort of very quick question, really, which is, if you had a magic wand to sort of waft over government right now, what would you be really asking them to do in terms of training to address the challenges that the NHS and the care sector at large are facing over the future?
So I think for us, it's we've had a hell of a lot of change, and we want to really bed these changes in and make the most of them. So what I don't want to see is dramatic changes in direction again before we've made the opportunity that we've currently got work. And you've already had a conversation there about what the reality of the health and care sectors. Our patient journeys span the whole of health and care and transport and housing and education. So if we're really going to have a skill sector that supports all of that, we've got to have an education system that supports a much more integrated way of working.
Thanks very much, Jane. That's been fantastic. And I think,
thank you.
In the way we're going to be standing up again in a moment and clapping for the NHS, let's make sure we continue to stand up for skills more broadly, because we know this is what's going to take us through and beyond COVID. So lovely to speak again tonight,
and
Jane.
Kirstie, thank you.
And have a good evening. And Tom, back to you.
Back to Tom in the studio. Kirstie, thank you so much for kicking off Stand Up for Skills. We'll be hearing from you again next week.
You will. See you later.
See you later. Thank you, Jane. So there you have it. Hashtag Stand Up for Skills, as well as hashtag Skills World Live. So that's about it for tonight, folks. Very, very close now to that part of the week. We're out on our doorsteps, clapping for carers. Don't forget, we've got a humdinger of debate coming up for you tomorrow. Should we be sending fewer young people to university? We'll also be debating that thorny subject, and I'll be talking to two stalwarts of the stage. Charles Clark, the former Education Secretary, will be joining us, and Clare Fox, the Director of the Academies of Ideas and Sky newspaper reviewer, and actually a general iconoclast all round. She'll be on the show. And don't forget, if you want to be on Skills World Live, contact us at skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. Now, as ever, it just leaves me a bit of time to remind you of the people that make me barely passable as a presenter on this community radio show. Indeed, the real brains behind the operation is Kelly O'Mara. And it is O'Mara, not O'Meara, she reminded me today. And not forgetting, of course, Fab's very own digital producer, Ellie Hansen. Skills World Live is a FE News production supported by the Federation of Awarding Bodies Platinum Partners Programme. Let's now get out on those doorsteps and say thanks to all those thousands of NHS and key workers. Subscribe to Skills World Live at fenews.co.uk/Skills World.